Ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution, as we have it now, represents an evolution of earlier conceptions, going back to the first days after Liberland's been announced. Basically, the concepts are 6 years old, but they evolved. And I was just one of the many people who worked on it, so I would like to thank you all for a job well done. I hope some are listening. Well, some are certainly listening. So, a constitution is a legal document, and we did make it so that it is a well-ordered normative text, just like a normal law, just like any law of any country. So it has the standard of a law, and what a normative document is that it gives people, subjects, rights and obligations. So if you read the Constitution, basically in every paragraph you have rights and obligations given to someone, or limitations given upon something, and that something is usually going to be the government, as you are going to see soon. Now, I would like to promise that this is also how the future laws of Liberland should be written, clearly, systematically, easy to comprehend, even for non-lawyers. The text is readable from top to bottom. You don't encounter new terms without the document first defining them for you. So I hope it's getting more readable, and it will, of course, evolve further to be even more understandable and readable as a legal document. But a constitution is much more than just a legal document prescribing John not to play his music too loud after 22 p.m. It is the first breath of life of a forming legislature, and in a way a breath of life of a nation. It is a symbol, a point of pride of the citizens, an element of what makes Liberland special, what makes it Liberland. So the Constitution is not just a legal document, it's a story, a tale of the free people of the world who sought in vain for their homeland, in a world governed by attitudes those free peoples found incompatible with their continued freedom. They decide to leave all that behind, to start somewhere else. This may be a physical migration to the land where Wiep now is, or a migration step over to the virtual space to govern more and more affairs from there, a state you can carry in your pocket, so as to say. In any case, it is the point that you find yourself in this constitution. So, the constitution begins with the first principles these people can agree upon. And the first principle is, everyone shall have property in their own life. One's body, life, and destiny shall be the private affair of every individual. For who else would control your life than you yourself? From affirming this self-property, there naturally follows ownership of property in material objects and in controllable phenomena of nature. As soon as there is more than one person living in Liberland, the inhabitants have to agree upon their basic rules of conduct. All those who are under this constitution agree about the importance of ownership. So the basic rule must be that one shall not act upon the property of another without the knowledge or agreement of the owner. In accordance with the long-established libertarian tradition, we call this rule by name, the non-aggression principle. At first, the people should all grant to themselves, and to each other if need be, the right to protect their property by their own powers. Will this be enough? Will it not lead to the dictatorship of the strongest? The need to uphold the non-aggression principle leads us to the second book of this constitution, the Book of Governance. Not all persons can equally well protect their property, some being stronger or wealthier than others. Judging that it would be for the best if all the property should be protected fully and equally, the people conceive of a government called public administration to achieve the equal protection of life and property rights amongst all the people. The people have, of course, many concerns about governments, for were it not states ignorant about liberty, from whom those people chose to secede. The book therefore begins with a series of limits, which public administration shall never step over, and behind which the lives, property, and liberty of persons will be kept safe. Government shall only act when empowered to do so, based on law and the Constitution. We introduce strict division of government powers. That division is in conformity with traditional political theory. We have the judicial power, the legislative power, and the executive power. We also will have a fourth power of sorts, the power of oversight. We mandate public administration that it will work only to fulfill its primary purpose, and that is that it will, when in doubt, act favorably to individual rights. So we have a government which protects individuals and their property in life and in their own being, and which makes sure that people keep behaving in accordance with the ownership laws and with who owns what. Now, seeing that abstract principles alone often do little to protect values they are intended to safehold, as happened in extant states, even formerly freedom-loving ones, we add a set of rights chosen to give definitive answers to certain painful and specific questions. So we have rights which specify the freedom of use of one's property, mainly that the government will not interfere with that, freedom to act and to make contracts with others. There is a delimitation that contracts shall be respected, that the public administration shall not make restrictions on contracts beyond the very, very narrow scope of some boundaries like criminal law. Then you have the freedom of movement, the freedom of assembly. Now, the freedom of movement is very important in those Corona times, and we know what happens if it is infringed upon. We have the American clause of no searches without warrant. So that means that my house is kind of my castle, and it's the seat of my privacy. Let's put it that way. And you have also the freedom to protect your property without government interference into that freedom, which is very important. Well, there can be some minor boundaries, but in general, you are free to protect your property by your own hand and by the help of others. Now, we have freedom from taxation, which means that Liberland is not going to collect taxes. How it's going to work, we'll talk about this a moment later. And we have also no victimless crimes. I talked about the criminal code. This must be very, very narrowly understood, that only if somebody infringes somebody's life, property, and so on, well, it's actually or property rights, then you have a victim. And then you can talk about crimes if there is like a damage. So rights are constructed as freedom from something, and it's usually from the government, right? But not a freedom to receive something from the government, except for peace, because we know that the government usually pays for such perks, such positive rights, with money taken from other people in taxes, and we don't want that in Liberland. After we have enumerated an exemplary list of rights, for we leave space for future legislators to add new ones, we go straight to the description of the institutions of governance and to the limitations of their power. So, we begin with the judicial power. For that is the branch which is most intimately connected to the stated purpose of the public administration to protect the non-aggression principle and to keep the peace. Just like in America, there will be one Supreme Court and then the other courts, the inferior courts. Those courts may be set up by the government or even otherwise. The main power of the Supreme Court will be to do constitutional checks ex ante, meaning that any law that gets through the legislative process has to be checked by the court before it takes legal force. No constitutional conformity means that there will be no legal force to that regulation, actually, law more specifically. All judgments of the Supreme Court will be binding in their decision in law for similar cases before all inferior courts, which will make sure that there is legal certainty. There is something which is quite important, and that is that not only the Supreme Court can take down laws, but we have also the constitutional control ex post, and that gets done by every court. What does it mean? If you as a citizen feel yourself being infringed by something the government of Liberland did, the public administration did, you can go to a court, and if your appeal has merit, then the court can take down that law. It will no longer have to be followed. So lastly, I would like to say something about private tribunals. We hope that Liberland will attract private tribunals of arbitration. There are many. It's an established field of law, a very vibrant one, and we hope that we will welcome many, or at least some of those tribunals for, say, international commerce and other such issue in Liberland. And we want to make the judicial area as good for that as possible, right? So Then we go to I have a judicial immunity here. So judges will have judicial immunity, but they will also be asked to govern themselves, and that means that they will hold themselves to standards, and the Constitution says that those have to be actually higher than those of normal citizens for like morality and of course professionality and so on. So there is also liberty in that and also opportunity in that. Okay, now we go to the legislature power, which of course is the power to regulate, to make sure that relationships between people become more predictable and to give the judges some basis on which to work. Now we have the concept of citizenship here. The people, all the people who have something to do with Liberland, vest the power to regulate in the citizens, who will be those people who prove their skin in the game with respect to the fortunes of Liberland. Citizens will enter a contract with Liberland. They get to vote in elections and referenda. Now, we have two types of democracy: direct democracy and representative democracy. The Constitution stipulates the possibility of a consensus, which can do virtually everything, but it's very difficult to achieve. So we have the referendum, which is more realistically going to happen and succeed, and that referendum is strictly limited by the Constitution. The referendum can take down laws ex ante, and they can expose, which means like during the life of a law, they can also ask for it to be taken down. So, having regulations, we have here the representative democracy, which will do the day-to-day legislative business. Now, the referendum and the consensus are kind of exceptional, or well, they can happen often because they will happen mostly virtually. But the day-to-day legislature will be governed by the Congressional Assembly, into which the citizens will vote representatives. Representatives can propose and pass laws, and those laws will be vetoable by the referendum or by the Supreme Court. That's like mandatory. The cabinet will also do something very interesting and important, and that is that it can make decisions which are easier to pass than laws, but they only apply for the public administration. And you have to see that as this kind of inner check for the legislative check for the executive power. Now we're going to that, the executive power. That is strictly limited. That's of course the power which actually executes, which does the things which legislature mandates it for. This is the active part of the public administration. This is what we think of when we say government for most of the times. In Liberland, the executive power will be run by the Prime Minister and by the cabinet, and it will be the one institution which is the most closely watched. The cabinet will have only 4 ministries. That's in the Constitution. Any agency it sets up beyond that will be under the watchful eye of a minister. So it can set up agencies, but not outside of the ministries. There will be no taxes. So the bloating of institutions, which we see everywhere else, should not happen here because there is simply not enough money to bloat for. Judicial and other oversight will apply to everything the ladies and gentlemen in the employ of this branch, called agents of public administration, will do for us. And should they try to act against the Constitution or the people or the principles, they will be stopped by one of the many checks and balances. The cabinet in Liberland will be limited in its actions by a list of tasks enumerated in its constitution. This is different from normal states where the tasks are usually enumerated in laws, which then the cabinet or the government passes or proposes to be passed, and then make sure they are passed, because they also tend to have majorities in the assemblies of those countries. Well, here we have it all in constitution. So to make a new task for the public administration would require a constitutional amendment, and that's of course much more difficult to do than in normal states. And that means that our cabinet will not have it nearly so easy to extend its competencies. And this is by design, because more competence for the government usually means less freedom for the citizens. Lastly, the Constitution sets rules for the powers of oversight and vests them in the President and in the Senate. There will be one head of state, the president, who will be responsible for overseeing the affairs of Liberland in the broadest sense, aided by the Senate, composed of those citizens who have the most skin in the game of all, the people who have invested significantly into the future of Liberland. So what does this oversight do? The president can appoint or reject high officials, those high officials which the appointments or rejection of which mandates upon him the constitution. And mind you, he can really appoint them or reject them. It's not a ceremonial function. So the president can do his oversight mainly in this way. And the Senate, which is the body the president is actually the leader of, and he is part of, will be able to veto any proposed law or regulation. And a vetoed regulation will have to go back to the drawing board. And the Congressional Assembly will have to deal with all the objections of the Senate before they can hope for their proposal to have legal force, to ever have legal force, and have to go again before the Senate. Besides that, the president also represents Liberland at the international stage and can do a couple of other things like lead voluntary defense forces if these should be required, but Liberland will have no army, so as to say, so this is just optional. Okay, so this was the power of the oversight, and this concludes the text of the Constitution. It is brief, it is supposed to be simple, but it is supposed to be powerful. We hope that the Constitution will become the cornerstone of Liberland statehood and governance, and that very soon people will have a space to live by it and to advance in their lives while benefiting from the rights of this Constitution shall bestow upon them. Thank you for your time.